Today we have our two speakers, Abderrahman Meliji, Director of Data for Transport for Cairo, and Mohamed Egazi, Director for Transport for Cairo, and they were the ones who developed the training materials you're gonna see today in the presentations together with Transitech. So happy to be here. So I give you the floor now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicholas. We'll start by introduction to data by Mohamed Egazi, and then I'll take over. Yes, next slide, please.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. Hello, it's my delight to be able to join you today. Please allow me to introduce myself very quickly, to introduce our company, and to start with the objective of the workshop. Hi, my name is Mohamed Egazi. I'm Director of Transport for Cairo, and we are an entity that started 8 years ago with the purpose to make a project to map Greater Cairo, which is one of the biggest, if not the biggest metropolitan area of Africa. And from that, we developed a comprehensive methodology that we help take to multiple cities in Cairo, in Africa, and map multiple cities in Egypt as well. And we're delighted to have been invited to join you in the workshop today. And it's really to try to share the knowledge and expertise that we gathered over 8 years of working on how to map paratransit services. Basically, you take a city and you go a metropolitan area in Africa, you look at it from its boundaries of the city, and then you start to look what is the public transport that exists there across all of its different modes: formal, semi-formal, informal, create a map, which is worked for a big, rich database of it that can then be used for transport planning, but also journey planning purposes. Now, these maps are becoming more important in the age of climate change because they help us. Okay. Turn on the mic. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, it's better now.
Yes, it's much better. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So, if I may, yes, mapping paratransit services has become ever more important now, especially in the age of climate change, because the data that's created through these maps is what's going to enable the green climate transition. It's what's going to enable cities to access green climate finance. It is what's going to be able to take transport planning in African cities to the next level and design solutions that are locally suited. So what are we going to try to learn today? First of all, what's the elements? What's the process? How do we map a city and create like this common understanding of all of the paratransit services within? How do we design a survey? How much does it cost? What are the steps? What are the parameters to design the timeline? Will it be a big team over a short period of time or a small team over a long period of time? And how does this affect the cost to allow us to work with the limited resources that we have? And ultimately, there needs to be purpose for why we do it. So what are the barriers? What are the solutions that the data shows us to improve the paratransit services using this map? Next slide, please. So we will be going through it over 4 steps. The first step is we'll take a look holistically at data and transportation. Where data is a word that's often thrown around, but it's ill-defined. Now, data can take many different forms. What are they? Where do they fit? Where do we use them? What are the nuances of different data sets to be mapped in the transportation space? And how do they interact with others beyond the transportation space, such as these cities that move using these systems? The second component will be focused on paratransit.
the context, how do they operate, what are these things that we need to keep in mind while we produce the maps. And then we go to the practical, to the applied part. How do I get from point A to B? How do we map the services? And finally, costs, practicalities. I was listening to a podcast yesterday and it was very interesting because it was talking about science and about how we learn about the scientific method in school, but how successful scientists are the ones who write successful grants. It's the same in transport planning. It is the effective design of a project, the effective use of data to design an intervention that leads us to invest in our transport systems. So these are the four elements: data, context, the process itself, and the costs. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Good. Now, I want us to create a framework of why we need this data. And the purpose for it is really to plan urban mobility systems sustainably, holistically, in an integrated fashion. Now, here in Cairo, a couple of years ago, we decided to take a geographic area and ask ourselves the question, in 10 years' time, how do we want to be traveling there? What do we want the transport system in the city to look like? And then we started searching different frameworks. How do cities do it? What is the best practice? And quickly, we came across sustainable urban mobility plans, SUMPs, SUMPs, sustainable urban mobility plans. And quickly, we found that this best practice is becoming increasingly standardized across the world. In the European Union, the SUMP has been standardized in a process. There is a guide, which was created by the European Commission, that all the cities in the Union area are encouraged to use, to be able to systematically work through the process of starting from a vision all the way to a set of projects that are implemented, and all of the steps in the middle. And as we dig deeper, we found that the same is happening in India. Indian cities cannot access federal funding from central union government without having such a plan in the first place. It is the same in Brazil. Every city needs to create an equivalent of a SUMP to be able to get the resources to invest in its system. And increasingly, we are seeing SUMPs being adopted in Africa. We have had the luck of producing one for the city of 6th of October in Cairo, and it was adopted by the city government afterwards. And we've seen other efforts in South Africa, in Eastern Africa, and in Western Africa. So what is a SUMP? Let's think of it as a cookbook. It is a menu of options, recipes that we take from the beginning to the end to really guide our thinking and our planning process for creating a better mobility system. Well, it starts with a preparation phase. We start looking, what resources do we have, financial or human or institutional? What are the stakeholders that are involved? Public sector, private sector, energy providers, transport service providers, regulators, companies in the automotive value chain, operators, the labor value chain itself, the paratransit service providers. And then we start identifying what is it that we want to do in the SUMP, the scope of work. And then we start with the diagnostic. And the diagnostic is the building block. You cannot build a building without solid foundations. And these solid foundations in a SUMP is the data. That's the data in transportation. I will get a little bit into more detail about this diagnostic and what it entails. But before I do, I want to keep the high level, the big picture. Once we have this diagnostic, which is a picture of what does reality look like today, how does the city move, what does the data tell us, we can then start creating a strategy, the scenarios for the future, the vision that we want, a better city. But what does a better city look like? What is a better transport system? And then we translate it into objectives and smart targets. This is phase number 2, strategy development phase. Then we go on to planning. What actions, what measures do I take? How do these measures fit with each other? And This is when a package of measures, the combined is much bigger than the set of pieces individually. Once the planning is done, the SUMP takes us to the implementation phase, which is followed by a monitoring and evaluation phase. And this matters because often we see good plans being produced, but failing to leave paper and enter reality. And this is where the holistic side of the SUMP starts showing its strengths. The implementation phase is about detailed planning of these packages of individual measures. Who will implement what, using what resources, involving which stakeholders, at what time, and when will we deliver it? It's about preparing these plans for implementation and going forward through individual projects. And the monitoring and evaluation is really taking a long view, really from the very first moment, thinking, what are my objectives? How will I measure, hold myself accountable to achieving these objectives or failing them? How will I monitor my progress to evaluate whether I'm arriving at it or not? So preparation, strategy, planning, implementation, and M&E. Let's focus on the preparation phase, the powerful fundamentals, the building blocks, the diagnostic. Now, when we look at the city, we always start by looking at the modes that operate in that city. And a SUMP is designed around this main KPI, key performance indicator, KPI, modal share. What are the different technologies, the different modes that users choose to travel between each other? It can be individualized motorized transport or private cars. And we see that it's not the best case for most cities because of density, space issues, but also environmental impact and the high costs associated with it at the system level. It's active mobility, AT, walking, cycling, and it is public transport. And in cities, in our cities in Africa, even in Egypt, especially in Egypt, most of public transport is dominated by the paratransit services. And what's the percentage of trips that takes all of these different modes? Which takes us to the second main KPI, the users. People make choices, and they make the choices to travel using the mode that suits them the most. When we see motorization increasing, it is often because private cars can be faster, are perceived to be more prestigious, could be more comfortable. But these are potentials, they are not facts. They are results of systems that can and must be improved. So it's about asking the user experience, be it in the use of public transport, the paratransit or the formal system, or in walking and cycling. Because only through improving these user experience can we shift people to move across more sustainable modes. That's what the SUMP sustainable plan is all about. And when we start here, we will see that we have 3 levels of focus diagnoses, and these are the ones that are in the orange boxes that we have here. The first one is the street level diagnostic. Nobody will use a bus if they feel that they will be harassed on the way to the station. So assessing the streets and this last mile access to public transport is very, very important. It is about the public transport network. And this is the essence of the data that we collect in mapping paratransit networks. Where are the stops? What are the trips that operate? How many services operate these trips, leading to what level of frequency? How much time does it take me to travel from one point to another, from A to B? How much time does this compare to taking a boda boda, a moto taxi, or a private car? Because the difference is the ultimate determinator to my choice as a user to take public transport or to take private cars. And finally, passenger surveys. What do they tell us? Are they happy? Are they not happy? And these 3 things, as grounded in the network, are the data and transportation that we use. I'm sorry, I took a lot of time here, but getting the fundamentals right is important. Any questions, comments? Shall I proceed? Okay, then let's go to the next slide, please. Fantastic. Now let's get into detail. What is this data? Well, if we want to use a textbook definition of data, then it means quantifiable, relational, structured data sets, and we should never use them on their own. It's about having them aggregated and analyzed. It's all about figures, it's all about comparison. Data relates to each other's. Public transport routes are intrinsically related to the streets and the stops that connect these streets with each other. And there needs to be a structured, because this is what allowed us to manipulate and to analyze the data. Now, if we look at the data in a pyramid format, and this is the visualization on the right side, data is the fundamental, it's the facts and the figures, the numbers that are very specific to representing reality. They're like a picture. But a picture is not useful on its own. It's useful when I understand it in its context, when I try to derive information from it. And this is where the categorization and the calculation of this data to actually have something that I can look at comprehensively, the map of the network as an example, allows me to have structured information, which I can then turn into knowledge, know-how, and deeper understanding of what is not visible on the first sight. And it is this knowledge that allows me to take decisions. The knowledge that the public transport network is highly efficient as is, and the problem is not in the network design, but elsewhere, or the other way around. This is knowledge. So to be able to get this data, we also need to always ask who will use what data sets. Data is a huge word. It can mean anything that we interpret into it. But for different stakeholders, it has different meanings. Let's start from the bottom of the pyramid. Users, citizens, the data point that they need is, how do I get to work? How much time will it take me? How much will it cost me? And how much time is really important, because if I arrive late, I might be fired. So it's really about this single data point that a journey planner can give me. And a structured map of paratransit network, a GTFS feed, maybe we'll discuss it in more detail later, is what enables me to use Google Maps to answer those questions for me every single time I want to take on a trip. Now, a government is the entity that designs the big picture for it. So to be able to identify their investment destinations, they need to look at the data from the big picture, the entire map. Accessibility is a key indicator that a public transport map of paratransit services allows us to calculate, or the quality of the network to move all citizens from their homes to the workplaces, quantified in a single figure, the accessibility index. And this is what makes it so powerful, because I can calculate it for today, I can calculate it for 3 different scenarios and identify the third scenario is the best, this is the one that we want to use. It's about operators. As an operator, I need to operate my vehicles. If my vehicle spends half of the day in the terminal waiting to board passengers, then I'm losing half of the potential money I could be earning. And this optimization is really important for operators. And it's often about sharing the data from the operators to the government, where the government aggregates. Remember, it's about aggregating these different data sets from different sources, aggregates all of the data from the operators to be able to derive information and knowledge from it, and share the knowledge back to the operators for them to improve their operations. So data is inherently collaborative. It's about using it together. And as researchers, trying to identify the best policies, trying to promote certain behaviors, that is more active travel, more public transport, which depends on active travel, less individualized motorized transport. This is how researchers utilize data for knowledge production. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in any pipeline of data usage, there is a life cycle. Data started with pen and paper. It started like 500 years ago with people creating tables and writing maybe 10 rows over 4 columns. But as the data increased to hundreds and thousands of routes, with each route being represented across every single right and left turn and kilometers of distance and stops, it started to become structured and machine readable and dependent on software. And this is why in today's day and age, data is always inherently digital and collected, analyzed, aggregated, and used to create information using software. And the knowledge is the soft part that the users of the software do. To create data, first we need to collect the inputs, which can become primary or secondary or sometimes tertiary data sources. Primary is when I go to the field to collect data myself. Secondary is when I aggregate it from other sources, potentially the government or from the operators. And tertiary is when I get it over search sources, big data sources, or existing research to bring them all together. Processing, step number 2, is the step of bringing it all together. And it's actually the most complicated step. Collection takes the most time and sometimes the most resources because nothing happens without it. But processing is the real art, is the real science, is the real knowledge-intensive side. And it's the one that is, to a large extent, automatable. Once it is properly processed, it should be easy to manage, to store, to retrieve. I need to be able to find the answers from the data that I want, and this is where a good structure is the name of the game. And finally, it's about analyzing, it's about using the data. Next slide, please. And this is where we have this comprehensive idea of a transport information system. I talked a lot about how data is inherently linked to computers and to digital workflows. But a good transport information system goes way beyond just the hard technology. It includes a lot of soft components, and I leave the floor to my colleague Abdurrahman to take us through them.
Thank you, Higazi, for this comprehensive introduction. As Higazi was mentioning, all of this data, it fits into a larger picture, right? We want to get to an end goal, whether we are researchers, whether we are the government, public sector, investors, and so on. Now, we looked at the data lifecycle. This structure we're going to follow, and we're going to be focusing this unit. We're going to be focusing on the planning aspect for the data collection. Now, when we say data, and as Higazi explained, we look at it in its, let's say, at its home. And where does data live? It's one of the components of the transport, what we call the Transport Information System, TIS. Now, a Transport Information System is just a name for the actual definition of an information system. And an information system is defined by 5 components, as we can see in this diagram. It's composed of people. We'll talk about each in detail, by the way. So during the session, we'll be going over each element one by one, according to the topic we're talking about. So we have the data. This is the main topic of this unit. And we have procedures. What are the processes involved in creating and maintaining this information system? And we have the people, whether they are the users, whether they are stakeholders, beneficiaries of the system, or whether they are the creators of the system. And we have the software tools and the hardware. We're going to see how all of these relate to each other, and note that it's a circular diagram. So it's not a hierarchical diagram where we have one step, and then the next step, and then the third step. No, they are in a circular relationship because all of them affect each other equally. Now let's dive more into data from a technical perspective. Next slide, please. Okay, so first let's talk about data types. What are the data types that we have? Because as Higazi mentioned, data is a broad term. Today, and for the topic of mapping paratransit services, we talk about 2 or 3 main data types. The first data type is the geographic data, which we call GIS, Geographic Information System data, and the tabular data. What do they mean? It's basically data with location information. So when I say a school, I say a school with these coordinates. It's located at this location. So it's data coupled with location information. For example, in our context, when we ask where do passengers commute from and where do they go to every day? Where do they come from? Where do they commute, take public transport from, and where do they go to? So we have an origin, a spatial geographic origin, and geographic destination. Another example, to which economic class do those passengers belong? Now, is this a geographic data point? No, we're talking about income levels, but we can couple it with the geographic data that we have about origins and destinations, right? So we are coupling numeric data with geographic data. Let's take a look at the diagram on the right. We can see the different types of geographic data. So we have data types of geographic data, and we have different types of geographic data. We have 2 main types. We can see vector data and raster data. Some of you might be already familiar with these terms, but we go over them briefly. Vector data, it can be polygons, areas. Those areas can be representative of country borders. They can be representative of districts or municipalities within country, within city. And they can represent many other things, such as bus terminals, if you want to represent them by area, by their area. Second, we have the line vector type. And these can represent anything. They can represent an origin destination pair from point A to point B. I can represent that by a line on a map, right? They can represent streets, the street network, the road segments, the bridges, the flyovers, and so on. And lastly, we have the point vector. Points can represent anything. As we mentioned, they can represent landmarks such as schools. They can represent locations of bus stops, for example. They can represent where people board or alight from a specific bus route. On the other hand, a bus route can be represented as a line vector, right? The bus itinerary. So these are all the vector data types that we have. Raster data is basically a picture, but a picture with location information. So each pixel of that picture knows its location. So when I say these green areas are located and I represent them as such, these pixels show, and these blue areas represent a river, for example, then each pixel has a geographic coordinate, and it can be overlaid on a map. All of these layers, they're like a cake, like a multiple layered cake, and all of them together, they represent, or they try to represent or model the real world. The next data type that we have is the general transit field specification, which Higazi already mentioned briefly, the GTFS. Now, what's GTFS? It's basically location data on transport, but coupled with temporal data on time, such as, okay, so location data on transport. For example, where are the bus stops? Where does the route come from and where does it go to? It's geographic itinerary. Temporal data, such as the schedules, the bus schedules, if they exist. What is the time between each vehicle and the next, the headway height. What is the travel time between one stop and the other? Right, so GTFS manages to couple this geographic and temporal data. Now, next slide, please. So we have data, this data set, this data type that's called the GTFS standard. We want to talk more about it because it's very, it's very crucial to this session. Now, the GTFS standard again stands for General Transit Fleet Specification. So, and a brief history about it. There was a transport authority, the Portland Transport Authority. It's called TRIMIT. They went to Google Maps, particularly, sometime in the 2000s, 2004, I believe, and they asked them, now, we as users, we can open Google Maps on our mobile phones or laptops, and we can say, I want to go from point A to point B using my private car. And you, Google Maps, you tell us you can take this road, and the trip will take you this amount of time. We want the same feature for public transport. We want to be able to say, I want to go from point A to point B, and it will tell me all the different buses that I can take and where should I drop off to take the other bus and so on to reach my final destination. So they started working with Google on this GTFS standard. And by standard, we mean it's something that we all agree upon. When we want to, for example, the PowerPoint format is considered a standard because it stores slides in a specific way. You know that it can include pictures, text. It goes from one slide to the next in a particular way. So we can all speak the same language. When I say a PowerPoint slide, you understand what I'm talking about. GTFS is the same way, but for representing public transport data. How is it stored? It's stored as a bunch of CSV files. CSV stands for comma separated value files, and they are basically just like text files that can be opened as tables on Excel or other tools. So each line of the file is a data record. So each file is a row in a table. And each record consists of one or more fields. By fields, we mean like columns. So it's a tabular, it's a bunch of tabular data sets. It's a bunch of tables. They are related to each other. We'll see how in the next slide, but for now, let's talk about some of the uses first. It's used, as we mentioned, for trip planning. How do I go from point A to point B as a user? But it can also be used, and this is very important, for analysis. For example, if we want to generate service areas, or what we call isochrones, or what we call reach polygons. For example, if you can see the image at the top right, you can see a lot of colors, but can you see the blue marker situated now? This is a blue marker that's a pin at downtown Cairo. And all the different colors, if you look at the legend, they say from this point, from this blue point, these are the areas that you can reach using public transportation and walking in this amount of time. So the green, for example, is from 10 to 20 minutes. This means if I'm starting my trip at this blue point, I can reach these green areas within 10 to 20 minutes. I can reach the blue areas, you can see further, the blue areas within 20 to 30 minutes and so on. So it can give you a measure of what Gazi was mentioning, accessibility. How much accessibility can public transport give you. Now, to briefly look at the structure of the GTFS, next slide, please. So remember, we said it's a bunch of CSV files, a bunch of tables stored within a folder on our computer. These are the CSV files. These are the tables. These are the files. We have one file representing trips, and by trips, we mean each route. You can see the routes at the top. Each route usually has two trips, one going and one returning, right? So we have the routes. What are the routes that we have? We have the trips. We have the agencies, the different agencies that provide the services, because we might have multiple agencies providing services in my city. And if you can see the green boxes, these are the station, the entities, the ones that have geography in them. The first one on the left, we look at the shapes. Shapes is a huge table that has a tabular representation of the vertex, the vertices, the itinerary, the path of each trip. So when we say my route has two trips, one going and one returning, shapes represented on like with geographic points, like points that draw a path. So I can know specifically where does this route, or what does it pass by, which routes and so on. Stops, the bus stops that we have, doesn't have to be formal stops, we'll explain that later, but it's a spatial entity, it shows us where exactly the stops are. And we have something called stop times. So it's basically a relation between the trips and the stops. It tells you this trip passes by these stops on its way, and between this stop and the next stop, will traverse it in like 10 minutes. So that's the travel time. The stop times does that for each origin destination. Like the first stop and the next stop take you 10 minutes taking this trip, and between the second stop and the third stop, and so on. So it's a huge file also that has temporal info. And we have things such as frequencies that shows schedules if they exist. We have CSV files explaining the fares. We have fixed fares and so on. So next slide, please. Yes, that's the one. So we're still talking about data. We're still in the data component of the transport information system. Now, we've talked about the data types. We've talked about GPFS and GIS data. But what are the most common data points that we use in transport? It's important here to note that not all the transport-related data is data on the transport network themselves, and that's it. There's a lot of other data points that has to do with, for example, the city's citizens, the passengers, as we mentioned in the beginning of the lecture, and the road infrastructure, for example, or some other infrastructure, like, for example, a business complex that's being built. This will affect transportation in this area, and so on. So we have this simple categorization. If we look at the table, we have some data on roads and traffic, some data on public transport, the public transport network itself, some data on demographics, so the passengers, and some data on the mode, like the preference of the passengers, such as the mode choice, and what are the behavioral parameters, how do they feel about it. As Higazi mentioned in the sum process, it's important to understand the behavior of the passengers. What is important for males versus what is important for females, to which age group? Do they prefer safety? Do they prefer transport to be affordable? So on. We have other data sets, but the list is endless, such as job opportunities, special attractors like public offices, hospitals, and so on. Now, it's important here to know that the blue data points are data that we don't go and collect from the field. It's data that we get from applying analysis on data that we collected. So remember, we have data, information, knowledge. This loop can be considered information. We got it from data. So that concludes our talk about data from a technical perspective. Now we'd like to go into procedures. So next slide, please.
Sorry,
So-
Abdulrahman, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to remind that maybe we're running a little bit late, so I would thank you to speed up for the next slides. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Nicholas. We definitely keep track of the time. Okay, let's go through what we mean by the paratransit context really quick. Because at the end of the day, this is what we're aiming to map, right? Okay, so the paratransit context. Before I go into that, you know your local challenges and local context way better than me or anybody else from out of town, out of the city. So here we are trying to generalize what does paratransit mean. So first, why it exists. Maybe it's important to discuss these things to understand how we can fit them into a data structure. Sometimes it exists because of unmet demand. There is demand in some areas, and they just pop up to meet this demand. They could be cheaper sometimes, or they could be pay as you go, like distance-based. They are congestion-based. It's the price is based on an argument with the driver. Maybe there is a baseline from a regulator, but then the price is variable with negotiations with the driver, something like that. And passenger-defined stops, this is something that we've seen in many contexts, where the passenger decides they want to get off here, they get off here, they don't have to wait till a formal stop to alight from them. Modes of operation, we have like the fill and go, so bus is parked till it fills and then goes. We have the variable fare, we mentioned that based on distance, congestion. So it could be hard to measure it in a data set or in a GTFS feed. It could be hard to put that in a GTFS feed. And we have services that are express. They stop many times, or they could be trunk, like they start from point A and only let the people off at point B, based on the road they're traversing, and they are demand driven. I think there can be more vehicles in the peak times, there can be less vehicles on routes at the off-peak times. Let's talk about the data challenges when it comes to the paratransit context. It could be challenging to define a route because the route could have inconsistent origin and destination. My first point of definition when I want to define a route and I want to put it in a database is that I want to have its geography. I want to see where it comes from and where it goes to. It can have inconsistent origins and destinations sometimes. We've seen that in multiple cities. This could be the case in your city as well. It can be something else. Sometimes there's deviation in the itinerary. They don't necessarily follow the exact itinerary every time. So if I'm claiming that there is a bus stop here that the passenger can wait till this route, this service comes by, I could be wrong because the driver decides to take a shortcut or something like that. Defining the stops, we talked about that. We create what's called virtual stops in areas with high boarding and alighting activity. This is the best we can do when they don't follow a structured formal bus stops when they stop anywhere. So we try to come up with these virtual stops. Defining the bus terminal even. Because when we say a bus terminal, a point of origin or destination, it can be a street corner. It doesn't have to be like a bus park designated. Here we are talking about observing reality, not what's right and wrong, what's legal or illegal. We're talking about observing the field as it is. So defining a terminal can be challenging. Very dynamic schedules, we've talked about that. They are demand driven. They don't follow a specific schedule. Next slide, please. Let's go into mapping paratransit services from a project management perspective. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we've talked about data. Let's dive into procedures. So we are following this transport information system structure. Next slide, please. So we have what's called the project, and we have its milestones. Now, you want to start with the very first step in your data lifecycle. You want to plan for a field research activity, right? So you have to look at it from a project management perspective. A project has to have a start, a clear conception, and an end after delivery and closure. This is the timeline that we can see here. What happens in between? Very generally speaking, we have these steps. Methodology design. When we say methodology design, we mean what surveys are we going to do? Because we have many transport surveys, we're going to talk about them in the following slide, but what are the surveys that we're going to do? How many surveys, so the sampling, how many surveys am I going to do over this route? And so on. What questions do we aim to answer and how we are going to answer them? Now, the next step, planning and budgeting. This is the step that we will dive in detail this unit. And it's about the project planning based on the methodology. So I came up with the methodology. I know what are the surveys I'm going to do. I know how many times I have to do these surveys. I have the sample size. Now I start to plan and budget to know the timeline and how much will it cost me. Next, we have the plan that we go into the field usage mobilization. The beginning of the field usage. It includes the staffing, getting the people and training them and giving them the hardware equipment that they're going to have and so on. Afterwards, after the field usage is complete, we start with the data cleaning and packaging. But it's important here to know that we can be working on data cleaning as the field research is going on. Don't have to wait till the very end. But after the very end, we package the data to present it as a deliverable for this project. So these are the steps that we have, looking at it from a project perspective. Next slide, please. Now, what are the most common survey types? Most of you already know these terms, but we go over them briefly. There are some surveys that are based on, focused on routes and public transport networks, and some are focused on the passengers. The first three, identification, onboard, and frequency, are focused on routes. What do we mean by identification? Identification is where the field researcher takes a mobile phone or takes any hardware equipment, surveying equipment, and they go to the different bus terminals and they start identifying the routes that operate from these bus terminals. Okay, so they go and tell us geographically. At this station, I found this route. This route goes from this station that I'm standing in to another station. And what if I didn't know about that other station, that destination station? Then they go to that destination station and they repeat the same process. They go there to the other terminal and they say, in this terminal, I found these routes. So we're identifying our network in this way. We are going from one terminal to the other to start with an index of what are the routes that we have in our city before we do any other service. After the identification, we have two surveys. The onboard surveys, where the field researcher takes a bus from point A to point B, takes it from the origin to the destination as a passenger. They don't interact with anyone. They pretend they are a passenger and they observe. While they're doing so, we're getting the GPS track. So we have the route itinerary, we have the route length, and after they drop off, they fill in a small survey such as about things such as fare, safety, how was the driving, and so on. This also gets us trip travel time and boarding and arriving patterns, gets us the service type if we we analyze this data set as well. The frequency data, very simple. We stand at the terminal and we observe how many vehicles are leaving for a particular route within a time interval. So a person will stand for an hour or two, and they say during this hour or two, I saw like 4 vehicles leave for this particular route. So we have an idea of the headway, right? And this can help us establish schedules for services that don't have a fixed schedule. We have some other passenger surveys, such as the origin destination. We ask them, where are you coming from? Where are you going to? What is the purpose of your trip? Is it for going to work? Is it going home? Is it for leisure activities? What is your level of income, to try to establish the profile, their gender, their age, and so on. And there are many other customizable surveys. Next slide, please. Now, in order to plan for a field research program, you have to understand the parameters. I'm not sure if we went to the parameters slide. Yes, thank you. So it's important to understand the parameters. The parameters, again, they are things that affect each other. So we have 2 main blocks. We have the project timeline. You can see the orange hexagon at the top. And we have the surveys building. We have parameters for the surveys, and we have parameters for the project timeline. If we can take them from the bottom, we look first at each individual survey. So we decided that we are going to do identification surveys, let's say identification surveys, onboard surveys, and maybe 1 passenger survey. So we're going to do 3 surveys. For each one of them, we have these parameters. What is the effective work shift hours? Like, how many hours does the field researcher work effectively? Because we can have the official 8-hour clock, but we can have them traveling from many points to get to another terminal or get to another zone where they want to interview passengers. So what is the effective work shift hours? It can be 6 hours out of the 8. What's the duration of each survey? What is the total duration of the surveys in terms of we're going to be doing these surveys for 1 week, let's say. And each survey takes about 30 minutes, for example, on average. How many working days in the week? How many sample routes? The redundancy means how many times will I be repeating this survey? Because I might need to repeat the survey to get an accurate estimation of the average travel time, for example, in the onboard service. All of these things accumulate into, let's say we have the parameters for the 3 surveys now, and they accumulate in the total parameters of the project. So for the project, we have the total project duration. Remember the timeline, the line that we've mentioned from the beginning to the end. We have the training and mobilization phase. We have the team size, and this is very important. How many people am I going to hire to do this data collection to fit within the project time? And of course, we have things such as national holidays and exceptional events. Next slide, please. For that, we created something that's called the Field Research Parameters tool, which we are going to share. It's basically an Excel sheet template, and it helps us calculate all of these different parameters. Remember, we said there are parameters for the survey. These are the parameters for the survey in this Excel sheet. You can see that there are many X's. These are multiplication signs, and they're equal, and then you have this purple cell block. That purple cell block means it's a figure that is calculated. At the end of the day, we input many parameters, such as the average survey duration, the effective field research hours that we expect, how many working days per week, and so on. And we keep putting these numbers and we say we have 25 team members, and we keep changing them, and based on them, the field research capacity, this is the most important number that we come up with. The field research capacity changes. So for example, if I increase the number of team members, if they are 30, then the field research capacity will increase. I will have 300, for example, working days rather than 250. So this tool helps us plan, how many days, working days, do we need to actually finish the job? But it helps us also understand that how many days extra do we have for any emergencies or contingencies. So I have to input some things, and the tool helps me to calculate the final figures. We do that for each survey to come up with the total number of working days. So after we have that, we can come up with the budget that we are going to see. Next slide, please. So we've gone into the parameters of the PGs. Now let's talk about, okay, we planned the process and we are ready to go into the field. Is that it? No, we need to have a better understanding first of the different challenges that we can face in the field. Again, you might know this better than anybody else because it's your city, you know the unique challenges that are represented in the field. But there are some common things. For example, from a project management perspective, field researchers turnover. You want to make sure that you hire more than you need because especially if the field research project is long in duration, you will have some people leave. Emergencies, maybe they are too tired, that it's too challenging, and so on. So you want to hire more than you need. And over time, you want to build a network of reliable contractors. Weather conditions, like rainy season, dry season, if you have like sandstorms like we have here, you want to avoid to have your project duration overlap with period of time of the year that has bad weather conditions. Any extraordinary traffic incidents. Safety concerns. Safety concerns can come from different places. I'm not saying this applies to your city in particular, but what we faced during our experience working in different countries. They can come from the drivers, the safety concerns. They can come from the passengers. They can come from even the police. Even if you have permits, you can have some police harassment sometimes because they don't understand your assignment and they see someone mapping the street. Sometimes that's a concern. Internet and cellular connection, that's important. Weather conditions affect also that. And it's important to plan for the little things, such as which SIM card to get for the smartphones. You want the better coverage, right? And you might even, worst case scenario, to consider offline solutions, such as manual data transfers. After the end of each field research shift, they go back to the office, they connect their phones to a laptop at the back office, and they transfer the data manually. It's not ideal, but it might be necessary. And geolocation. It's important to know that most of this data is spatial, geographic, and you get the GPS location from the sky. So it's hard to get locations with the roofs on top of your heads, or underneath bridges, or indoors, like inside buildings. So it's important to account for that. Next slide, please. Now, let's talk about cost estimation. Now, remember, we talked about the parameters, we talked about the different processes. Let's talk about the cost specifically for the field researchers, because next slide, please. Because this is the usually the most expensive element in your budget when it comes to a field research project. So look at the table on the left, please. You will find Okay, we have a project manager. Well, of course, all of these numbers are just for indication. We have a project manager, and he's going to be working, or she's going to be working 40 days, and each day costs X. So the total cost is Y, and the research associate, and so on. Now, we might have equipment. We want to buy, for example, 27 mobile phones. So this is the hardware. We want to have a field research manager. But can you see what is the most, if you look at the total cost, can you see what is the most expensive here? It's the field research team and the field research expenses. Because it depends on the sample size and how many days and how many routes you want to map and all the different parameters that we can see from the table on the right. So we calculated the parameters for each single survey. And let's say we have two surveys here on the right. We have the onboard surveys parameter and we have the passenger surveys parameter. Each presented me with 250 working days that are needed for the onboard surveys, and the other needs just 20 person days. So that means that in total, to do these surveys, all of them, I want 270 working days. Doesn't mean that I will wait 270 days. It means 270 working days. So if I have a team of 270 people, I'll be working one day, right? So I take this number, 270 days, and put it in my budget, and say, okay, their fees would be $26, let's say, for one day, and they will take like field research expenses for transportation, for meals, for mobile phones, like SIM card recharge and things like that. So in total, it will be about 9,000 some dollars. So you see, you've managed to put in all the parameter estimations based on the challenges that you know, based on the estimated duration of each survey that you carefully calculate. When I say on average, an onboard survey taking a bus from A to B will take for average about 1 hour. If I have existing data to come up with this 1 hour average, that's perfect. If I don't, it's important to be very careful that I say 1 hour, and rather than it's on average, maybe it's more than 1 hour. So it's always important to maintain a contingency, like to account for more what you want, more than what you than the basic needs. So we reached the end of this unit. We've talked about data, what do we mean by data? We've talked about the procedures, but not all of the procedures. There is data analysis, there are many other procedures, but we talked about the planning component of the procedures. And we talked about the survey parameters and how that helps us estimate cost, a budget for our projects. I leave the floor back to you, Nicholas. I believe we exceeded the time. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, it's completely fine. Thank you very much for all these insights on data collection and how we fit them into these intelligent transport systems. I don't know if in the audience there is questions to be asked to our speakers. I haven't seen any on the chat, so maybe minding the time, I would propose to squeeze the questions and answers at the end if there is any, and then we could go take a break for 5 minutes. So see you here back at 11:13. Thank you very much, and please stay with us for the unit 2 of this session. Thank you very much for those that are still with us. So please, I give you the floor again, back to Mohammed and Abdelrahman.
Thank you, Nicholas. So we talked about unit 1. We talked about the planning and the project management, so and the data. So it was more strategic. Now we're going into the more, let's say, fun part. We talk about the digital solutions of mapping paratransit. What are the solutions that are available now to make our life easier when we want to actually start doing these activities, want to start actually mapping? So the objectives of this unit, of this workshop, is to understand what are the digital solutions available and what are their multiple purposes. We want to relate the data life cycle, the different data life cycles to the different software solutions. So we'll go over them step by step as you'll see. And we also want to gain insights from real-world mapping projects. And we'll focus on Africa because actually this is our focus. This is our experience that we can share with you. And it's been mostly in Africa and in other African cities other than. So next step, please. The content is very general. We will talk about digital solutions for each data lifecycle, and then we will go into the use cases. Next slide, please. Yeah. So returning to our data, we talked about data. We talked about some of the procedures. Now we want to talk about hardware very briefly. And this unit will focus on software and hardware, and it will talk about procedures when it comes to collecting the data. So, the processes, collecting the data, processing it, and so on. Let's take a look at hardware. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now, an essential part of the information system is hardware, and we're talking about how am I going to have a database without a laptop, for example, without a computer, without a server. So the good news is that we already know about is that hardware now is cheaper. It's getting cheaper and cheaper and more efficient. Of course, if we're not talking about the devaluation of the US dollar, but in general, it's becoming more cheaper. We can now have smartphones that have a computing power of like 7 rockets, that took people to space, and you can have that in your pocket. So we have powerful technology that's more available. Okay. Best case scenario. What can we have in a best case scenario? What is the hardware installation? We want to have good smartphones for the field surveys. Okay. We want the field surveyors to have smartphones. We don't want people used in the near past to have very expensive surveying equipment to do basic field research and transport, such as the surveys that we mentioned. Now you don't have to do that. Yeah, you still have to do that for other exercises that are centimeter accuracy based, but not for our exercises with smartphones. You want to have laptops or PCs in your back office, the office that will be the center office that will be controlling this process. You want to have best case scenario again, all devices to reference a centralized database server. What we mean by that is you want to have one powerful machine that acts as a database server, and all the other devices, whether it's the smartphones, whether it's the laptops of the GIS specialists or the project planners, we want them all to be accessing the same data source. Of course, with limitations, and some people will be able to edit this data set. Some people will be able to see the database in its raw format. Some won't be able to see it other than for a mobile application. But you want the data to be centralized. You want it to be in one place. Why? Because if you have it decentralized, you can have multiple versions of the same data set. So then it becomes a problem of accuracy. Which data is the most recent? Who edited who changed this? Who changed that? Decentralized. Database servers can be hosted on the cloud now. So I don't have to buy this server. I can do that. But you don't. You don't really want to carry the burden of keeping this machine alive and carrying all the costs, the hosting costs that comes with it. Now you can host on the cloud. You can rent a database server from many providers, many cloud providers, we call them. These provide features such as you don't have to worry about the machine itself, the hardware. It's in the cloud, it's maintained. And God forbid any electricity shutdown or any fire that broke out, anything like that, any hazard like that, don't have to worry about it. And they provide features such as automatic backups. It's highly available, so if one machine fails the cloud, another machine becomes online so that you have high availability access to your database. So it's best to host on the cloud. That's my personal opinion. Now that's the best case scenario. In a no internet scenario, you will have smartphones in the field. You will have PCs. You still have to have these PCs in the back office, but you might have a local database server. It could be a machine, doesn't have to be super powerful, but then don't want a lot of people accessing it at the same time, right? Because it will fail. So if it's an average or moderate machine, you want to use it moderately also. And you might, if there's no internet connection, you might have to do the manual connectivity that we've talked about. So there you have the field and you have the office. You'll have to have like a manual connectivity between the two to transfer the data. Right? Or you could wait until the field researchers are home or are in an area with a better internet coverage and they transfer the data to the office online. Next slide, please. So we talked about hardware. Now let's talk about software. Start. Remember we said the data lifecycle. We had at the unit 1, we had the planning for data collection. This was our main topic. Now we planned for the data collection. We calculated the budget. We are now ready to go into the field. What's the first thing that we do? What's the beginning, the actual beginning of the data lifecycle? You collect the data. So in other words, you create the data in its digital form when you collect it. So that's the very beginning of this lifecycle. You don't process the data as I explained. This data has to be processed because you get the data in its raw format and you want to have it in a processed, understandable format. See details about that. Then you are storing it and managing it in a database. And lastly, you are analyzing it and using it. And we see analysis use cases in the real world scenarios that we mentioned. So let's, the next couple of slides will follow this sequence: collect, process, manage, analyze. So let's start with the collect. Next slide, please. Yeah. We want to collect data. We said that we're going to be using smartphone. This is the assumption. Okay, so naturally I need an app on a smartphone to collect data. When you approach this step, what's the app that I want to use? I have two main categories. The first category is the off-the-shelf. We call it off-the-shelf software. It means it's software that is for general use. It's already out there, but it's not fitted specifically for transportation. Now, these slides, when you get the material, they are hyperlinked. These icons, they are hyperlinked to lead you to the page to install these apps. They are here. We provide two examples. The first icon, the blue off-the-shelf, the blue icon, it's called GPS Essentials, and from its name, you can tell that it's about capturing GPS data in general. It's not fitted for like a onboard service or particular. It's not fitted for frequency service, right? But you can fit it. You can do some workarounds to say, yeah, I'm going to use this app in this way to get the data. For example, I will start a GPS track when the vehicle departs from the terminal, from the bus terminal. But I will have to follow up manually on which routes were surveyed and which routes were not. So maybe by phone calls or by WhatsApp with the field researchers, because this tool not fitted tell you, yeah, I understand what you're doing and I understand that this is a assignment and so on. So it's free, there's no backend, so it doesn't understand that there is a server. It won't transfer your data to a database server, or it won't reflect. It won't tell you that, yeah, I understand that you want to do these routes, and these are the routes that's being done. But there is no backend, there's no backends. There's no live synchronization usually of the data, so you can see what's happening live in the field. Someone is using that. But you can use many workarounds as we mentioned. The other tool is OSM Tracker. OSM Tracker actually uses OpenStreetMap. If you've heard of OpenStreetMap, it's like the open Google Maps. It's like Google Maps, but open. You can edit and download a bit that's out there. And it has millions of contributors from all around the world. And it's very active in Africa in general. Most African countries have very active OpenStreetMap communities. So if you're using OSM Tracker, that off-the-shelf app, the one with the green Android sign, you're uploading the data directly to OpenStreetMap. You still have to clean it afterwards, but it's useful in that sense that it's using OpenStreetMap as the storage of your data. You can use many other things. For example, in our first project, we used something called MyTracks, which is for joggers, for people exercising. Why? Because it had the feature of GPS tracking, so we had the path, and it had the feature of putting in points while you are running. Supposedly you are running, you are putting checkpoints. So these checkpoints, we said we're going to use it for the bus stops. And instead of giving each checkpoint a name, so a runner would give it, for example, the hilltop, or rest point A, for example, rest point B. No, we decided to give it a number, then a dash, and then a number. And these two numbers, separated by a dash, represented how many people left the vehicle, and then the second number, how many people boarded the vehicle. So we are doing this workaround to fit to our needs. Going quickly over the custom built apps. We have companies that faced the same problem and decided to create a tool with the proper project management software and everything like that, and the proper surveying tools and so on. They are built to do the job exactly, so they will offer many features to make life easier, but they're not always free. You might need some technical support. You might need some coding skills to edit them, or you might need to ask the software developers that did it to edit them, right? So yeah, we present 3 examples. Go Metro, which is a company based in South Africa. We are not promoting anything here. These are the custom built apps that we've come across. You can find others. There was something called Transit One. Now it's decommissioned, it hasn't been maintained, but it was very helpful when it was maintained for other users. The logo on the very bottom, that's Where is My Transport? They are again based in South Africa and they have their own tools to collect the data. We have Root Lab, which is a software suite developed by us, by PFC. We had to create it after years of doing this mapping. We had to create our own tools to be able to do the work accurately and efficiently. Next slide, please. So we've talked about data collection. Now we want to talk about the processing and managing, storing, so the 2 steps of the data lifecycle. Okay, what do we mean by processing and managing? talking about receiving the data from the field, then cleaning it, then storing it. To receive the data, you need a database server. This we talked about before. Or we have one PC that has a folder. That's the worst case scenario, but it can happen that you have one PC where it has a folder where all the users are transferring, all the field researchers are transferring their data to this PC. Now, how do we clean and store the data? You clean and store the data using mostly GIS software. Desktop GIS software. Desktop meaning it's on a laptop or a PC. As you can see, we talked about how the data can be stored as, but in this particular context, data can be stored in two things. Either database tables, and by database tables, we mean they are tables within a database software. And we have here linked examples to different open and non-open software tools. They are all what we call relational database management systems, or RDBMS. Meaning, relational, what do we mean by relational? These are tables, different tables that has relationship to each other. That has a relationship to each other. So for example, if I want to say I'm surveying the passengers, and they say I went from point A to point B using this transport and this transport and this transport. They had to change the bus 3 times to reach the destination. How can I relate these 3 modes that they mentioned? How can I relate them to my routes table? If I have a route number, a fixed route number, that I can relate to this person's response, then I know that this person took this route. So there is a relationship between 2 different tables. At the very basic, an employee belongs to a department. So there is a relationship between the employee and the department. What is that relationship? One department has many employees. So that's what we call a relational database. We have a database for our institution, for your institution, for example. You must have this, you definitely have it, because it's the basis of everything, the salaries, the number of staff, the employees, and so on. So relational databases are all around us, but they are like out the scenes. These database software, they also support version. So we can have multiple versions of the same table, and we can go back to an older version if we want to compare it to a newer version, and so on. It keeps track of the version. It allows editing, of course, multiple editing, so multiple users can be editing the same table at the same time. It allows backups, and it allows recovery. And have a backup of your database, and you can restore it if anything happens. This is the first and most professional form of storing data in database data. The second is the flat files format. What we mean by flat files format is that these are files that are stored in a folder that I can access, like I can access anything else, like I can access music on my laptop. I go to a folder and I open the music file. So when we say flat files, this is what we mean. They are files that are just in a folder, stored directly on the disk. Now, is that not the case with the database table? No. A database table, you cannot access it from a folder like that. You have to access it through a database software. It's a technical difference, but it's important if we want to understand how the different data is stored. For the flat files, we have many examples. Remember the CSV, comma separated value files that we talked about in Unit 1. This is how the GTFS files are stored. They are stored as flat files, a bunch of CSV files within one folder. For geographic data, we have many flat file formats. but we can mention the most popular, which is the shapefile and the GeoJSON. Again, there's a link here to guide you through the different types of that file geospatial formats. But the most popular you hear about, or you already know about, are the shapefile format and the GeoJSON formats. These are files that I can just drag and drop into my GIS software. Now, to view and to analyze and to edit the data, you need the software tool, right? Data is stored, but you want to access it. You can access it with the desktop software. For the GIS desktop software, the most popular software tool is the QGIS and ArcMap. QGIS is open and free, and when it's completely free, it's completely open, and it's very powerful. It's become very powerful ever since it was created. ArcMap, it's a very powerful tool, but it's commercial and you have to pay a license. It's created by Esri, a company called Esri. So you have these two options. You also access the data using the database admin. Remember, we said flat files you can access directly from a GIS software. Database tables you can access from a GIS software as well. But for full control over the database and the ability to do backups and recovering these advanced administrative tasks, we use something called the database admin software. There are many open alternatives that we provided here in these slides, such as Beaver, PHP-MyAdmin, and PG-Admin for Postgres database. Now, before going into the next slide, we want to describe what is this image on the right. This is a snapshot, a screenshot from QGIS. You can see this is the previous slide, please. Yeah, sorry about that. This is the screenshot from the QGIS software. The one that we mentioned is the open, most popular GIS software tool. As you can see, it's very simple. Map number one, the main and the most, the widest area is the map canvas, your map. And if you can see in the screenshot, there is already data such as the bus routes and bus stops. Bus routes in blue and bus stops in red. And remember the vector GIS data types. So these two would be line vector data type for the routes and point vector data type for the stops. Now, if we go to the label number 2, the layers panel, you can see all the layers panel. We said it was like a cave. You overlay the layers on top of each other. So this is where you control that, the layers panel number 2. Number 3, the status bar has things like coordinates, the scale of your map, how zoomed in or zoomed out you are, your spatial projection for people who have a geography background, and so on. And number 4, the toolbars, helps you with editing, with moving around the map, with viewing the data. Toolbars, like in any software, you have the toolbars at the top. And number 5, lastly, is the browser panel. And if you can see, it's a bit tiny, but if you can see that you can access data from folders. So you have the C, the D, the folder side, but you can access them all also from database as database tables. And you can see the options like Oracle, PostGIS, which is Postgres, something called Spatial and so on. So you have the ability to access data from flat files or from database tables from QGIS as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. We've mentioned already this GIS vector data. We said points, lines, and polygons. Let's see them in action. Now, the first image on the left, you see all 3 types that we mentioned in the transportation context. What do we mean by that? You can see three things in the image on the left. You can see a blue and the red line. You can see orange dots, small orange dots, points. And you can see something called polar core station, which is a polygon, the striped polygon. We have the three types of vector data here, and they happen to be representing our transportation level. How is that? The points are bus stops, the lines are the bus routes, and the striped polygon, third type of polygon, that's a bus terminal. We draw it as a polygon to have a sense of its boundaries. We could have put it as a point. It's a personal choice, but it's not a personal choice. It's a technical choice. It's will I need some time to get information about the area of each terminal in square kilometers or square meters? Then I will use the polygon because it has the boundaries, right? Maybe I want a simple representation that I use a point. And we can see, remember how we said GIS data is linking tabular information with location data. So you see that selected line, the red one. The window that has identified results, this window, it's the attributes, the data points within this line. So I can see the line geographically on a map, but I can also see it has many attributes, such as origin. So this line's origin is a circle station. I'm looking at the bottom of the attributes. Okay. Origin is circle station. Destination is Malam station. Length in kilometers is 10.2 kilometers. We have all of these attributes and others. It's a throttle, like it's a 14-seater vehicle. So I have all these attributes that are linked to this route's geographical itinerary. Now let's talk about the attributes. Let's take a look at the image on the right. These are the different, and again, this is very basic. There are much more, but these are the different data types that we can have for each attribute, for each column. So my GIS data, I can add many columns. Each column can have a different data type. It can be a number. It can be a decimal number with fractions. It can be text. It can be date, like date and time column, and so on. These are the different data types that we can use. And of course, when you are designing your database structure, you are saying you have to imagine this before you go into the field. You want to say, yeah, I want to have ship start time. So it would be like a timestamp. What is the time of the day and what is the date that this field research started moving from the terminal? And you want to have an end time, like arrival time for the data set that you have. You want to have what is the vehicle type? So we want to have a text field that is describing the vehicle type, right? We want to design all of these attributes for you to see because a good design will get you the data points that we mentioned at the very beginning when we said that data. What are the most common data points? We said you can get ridership, can get demand, can get building and lighting like clusters, hotspots. All of these data you get, being able to calculate data from different attributes. And this is all based on good design. Slide, please. Okay, we talked about processing the data and managing the data. Remember when we talked about, briefly talked about OpenStreetMap. We want to give it more credit, really. For those of you who don't know it, I know that some of you already know. What is OpenStreetMap? It's the pre-wiki world map. You know how you have Wikipedia, whenever we search something on Google, we find that there's a link to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is based on the contribution of people like you and me. You don't have to be an employee at Wikipedia to provide information, right? It's the same with OpenStreetMap. The first question that pops to our heads usually is if it's free for everyone to edit this data on the world map, would that mean it's accurate? Someone can go in and put just any data. Yes, that's true. You can do that. But keep in mind that this is a very, very well-maintained project, and it's based on volunteers from all over the world, very active. So there are moderators. So there is like sabotage behavior. It's being noticed, and they capture that right away. Same with Wikipedia. When you say someone saying stuff on Wikipedia just to be like offensive or whatever, you'll find people correcting it the next day or maybe even the next minute. It's the same with OpenStreetMap. So I would say, from experience, it's been accurate. Actually, in Egypt, it's one of the least areas where we have an active community, unfortunately. But in many other African cities that we've worked in, there was a very active community of students, even from the public sector. We've seen contributors to OpenStreetMap. More technically, it's a place that stores vector data, points, lines, polygons. Again, as you can see in the screenshot, you have what you ask the business to. It's drawn as a polygon. Have cycle lanes, have the road network, have landmarks around it, like the cafes, everything like Google Maps, but you have full access to it. As you can see, this is an edit. You can edit the features. You can say this is a building of type X. Its name is this and that. It has how many floors, so on. You can enter all of these data through a very nice, friendly, user-friendly web editor, which you can access by going to this website, OpenStreetMap.org. So it's the free Google Maps. Data is editable and downloadable, so you can download the data to empower your analysis. If you want to say, I want the GTFS to give me results, the GTFS has to run on a road network, right? Because after you leave the bus, you have to walk, right? So you need the road network data. Where do you get this data? Mainly from OpenStreetMap. So it's important to have this data source well maintained and to encourage the community to use it. We have more than 8 million registered users on OpenStreetMap. It has data on roads, buildings, points of interest, natural features, land use, transport, basically everything that you can find because it's a map. So next slide, please. So we talked about all the data life cycles that we have, but we haven't yet gone into the actual analysis, right? And for that, we will talk about some use cases. Slide, please. First case, Cairo, and it talks about trip planning. Remember when we were talking about the history of GTFS, and we said Trinidad, Portland Transport Authority in the United States, they wanted people to know, they wanted the citizens of the city to know how to go from point A to point B. So they said, yeah, let's create this GTFS feed. Now in Cairo, this is very recent, this was about 5 years ago. We said we want to do the same thing for our city. Actually, Transport for Cairo was founded. First, we are now a transport consultancy, but first there was a very simple objective. We want to create a map for public transportation in Egypt, in Cairo, I'm sorry, and this accumulated in creating a GTFS feed. So what happened, we followed the steps from the left to the right. What happened is that we said, okay, in order to get to a GTFS feed, to get to this final result that we want, we need to collect this data. And in order to collect this data, so we define which data points do we need. We need travel plan, we need geographic itineraries. We need to have an indication of where most probably the stops are, because we have to follow the GTFS standard. The GTFS standard tells us you need to give me information on routes, you need to give me information on trips, on stops, on travel time, on schedules. This is the GTFS standard. So we use that to come up with, okay, we need to do these key surveys. And we talked about them, you know them. Identification surveys, onboard surveys, and frequency surveys. We went into the field. We did those 3 surveys for all the public transport services that we could find, but also that we were able to budget for. And this is important because coming up in we have a small exercise that we'll be doing together. It's important to note that you have limitations. It's not just about how many routes you have in your city. It's about when do you need to end this project by. It's about how much money do you have, because you'll have to pay those field researchers and you have to pay the employees and so on. So we did those 3 surveys. We got the raw data from the feed, we processed it, stored it in a database structure that is well based on the GTFS standard. And then we used some coding skills to write like a script. It's called a data script that you create with minimal coding skills to come up with, to transform the data to this GTFS. What happened next? We need a software that uses this GTFS, consumes it, and presents it to the user in this format that you can see on the right. You want to have a map, and you want people to be able to ask, how do I go from point A to point B? Now, Google Maps, in its essence, it's considered a trip planning software. It takes in the GTFS feed, but you have to contact the Google team because it's not open. You have to contact the Google Maps team and you tell them, I want to upload my GTFS data to your platform. And what happens next? They go over some quality assurance steps with you, and then you have this result. You have, if you can see in the image, the microbus, which is a paratransit service. It wasn't represented in any digital format before. The trip plan tells you that you need to take the microbus. That's your reality. You need to take the microbus, you need to walk how many minutes to the metro, the subway, and you take the subway to your final destination. So you have this intermodality between the different points, paratransit, formal, informal, and you can, in the options, that's based on how good the trip planning software is. Based on the options, you can filter out, you can say, I don't want to use this kind of service. So I don't want to use the microbus, the 14-seater, or the metro. Or I don't want to use the subway, I want to use only the cheaper services, the paratransit services, and so on. So this was one example of getting from the point of zero digital data in Cairo to having this GTFS feed live on Google Maps. So, now, next case is also from Cairo and talks about accessibility and access. Now, remember, Higazi mentioned accessibility. Let's take it from the end. Let's take a look at this map on the right side. What does it tell us? First, it divides the greater Cairo region into even-sized units, which are here the hexagon, right? You can see each hexagon, so it's covering all of Egypt. Those gaps in between is because these are areas that are uninhabited. These are like mountains or deserts. Each hexagon has a color. This color, what does it represent? This is important to understand. So if I am within, if I take one hexagon, if I am living or if I'm starting my journey from within this hexagon, then I'd be able to reach, if I'm in one of the yellow hexagons, I'd be able to reach more than 20% the total job opportunities, the greater Cairo region. I'll be able to reach more than 20% of the jobs in the greater Cairo region within 60 minutes of taking public transportation. So I want an indicator to tell me how many jobs can reach from different locations around the capital within a specific time period using public transport. And you will notice here something very interesting. These thick 3 red lines are the subway, the metro. The metro is not affected by traffic. It really increases accessibility to the areas around it. But also it has to do with the job distribution. So the areas in yellow, they are focused around the metro lines, but also they are downtown. So you have more people living downtown, and you have more jobs within downtown. So within 60 seconds, within 60 minutes, you can reach more jobs, right, from the actual percentage. Let's take a look at the very right-hand side of the map. You'll see a city called Times of Ramadan. It's at the outskirts of Cairo. Little transport services go there. Not many transport routes go there. It doesn't have. It has factories and it has some job opportunities, but it doesn't. It's little compared to the job opportunities in the remaining the rest of Cairo. So you'll see that the job accessibility figure is very low. How do you get to that result? How do you get to this indicator? Now we start to look at the left-hand side of this diagram to understand the steps. We take in these data inputs. We take in the route GPS survey data, the survey data. We convert it to GTFS. We use a trip planning software now. Can I use Google Maps as a trip planning software to come up with these accessibility figures? No, it's not open. So I have to use an open software, an open trip planner software, and it's called Open Trip Planner. Like this is its name. It's Open Trip Planner, and you can access it. You can download it. It takes in the GTFS feed, and I ask it this software. I ask it. I tell it I want the reach polygon. The reach area that I can reach, I want the geographic area that I can reach within 60 minutes of public transport. And it returns to me, it tells me, where do you want to start from? I want to start from this area. Remember the example that we showed with the many colors of the GTFS at the very beginning? It's the same here. It shows you where can you go, how far you can go from a certain point within 60 minutes. Next, we take, so now we have the reach polygons, very nice. Okay, what do I compare these reach polygons to? What am I comparing them to? I'm comparing them to the location of job opportunities. So we take population data and couple them with point data, point vector data of job opportunities. So I have a point representing hospitals, I have a point representing schools, points representing this and that. And each point has an attribute inside it that says I have 20 job opportunities. I have a supermarket, I have 15 job opportunities, and so on. So I get this reach polygon, I overlay it on top of these job opportunity points. And now each reach polygon knows how many job opportunities it's covering. each polygon, so I know how many job opportunities within it. So in other words, in other non-technical words, each area understands, I now know how many job opportunities are covered for each area within 60 minutes of public transport. So you see that's in basic terms, it's getting in multiple data sets, putting them in a blender, which is the analysis, to come up with knowledge. Remember the pyramid of data information knowledge. This is the knowledge. Now I know the index of job accessibility in my city, and I know where it's best to improve accessibility. So I know how many people would benefit if I did this future infrastructure project. I know how much accessibility will increase in terms of percentages. Next slide, please. Yeah, I'll try to go over these slides quickly because I know we're over time. This is an example from the previous example on the data challenges that you face in a place with little data, like data scarce context. We want to come up with the job opportunities data set. Maybe the government sources are not open, maybe the census is too old. We want to come up with an alternative. We want to know, we want to have a layer of points representing job opportunities across your city. So this is an example. What we used here is caching. So we cache the data from multiple sources. The first step is getting your list of job opportunities categories or list of keywords. So for example, we follow the standard. This standard said that you have this category: factories, ministries of government, organizations, hospitals and clinics, and so on. After that, we take this categorization and we start using it to query to get the data from different big data sources. These included Google Maps. These included something local here called Yellow Pages, but you might have something similar in your city. Fowry, which is like a point of sale vendor. Shamsiya, which is an NGO that was working on mapping all the hospitals and clinics. Cairo. So we used all of these data sources. We got from them these spatial data for these categories. Afterwards, we did some data cleaning. We removed the data that had no location information. Of course, we got like thousands of points. So we have to do like automated data. We started removing the duplicate data. So any 2 points that are exactly on top of each other and has the same category, we remove them. We compare the same category from different sources and we choose the one with the higher quality. It can depend on the name, can depend on how many attributes that are there. If the other has missing attributes, we remove the other and keep this one and so on. And after all of that, after all of this process, you have cleaned your data set, you have this job opportunities data set, you have a spatial representation of job opportunities in the city. Now, of course, this is a very abstract explanation of this, but it's a case by case, it's a city by city scenario. But the takeaway here is you want to have workarounds where you don't have data. You want to have workarounds that represent reality as accurately as possible. The next slide, please. Now we go into our final example, our final use case, which is the use case of Addis Ababa. Addis Ababa, let's see how this timeline resembles our project inception, our project timeline diagram. So Addis Ababa had a very active transport authority. They wanted to make a change, and they wanted to have this digital data on their network. They have also Paratransit Services. They have formal services, they have bus companies, they want to have all of this data at their hands, and they want to enable it to passengers and to decision makers. So I won't go over all of the steps, but I'll go over the complete steps. We look at the second step on December 2017. There was a workshop that happened on leveraging digital technologies for transport data. The fourth step in April 2018, there was an agreement. So now you're gathering your stakeholders. There was an agreement with Addis Ababa universities for the universities to provide students the human resources for the data collection and analysis. And in return, there would be a training for the students on a real use case, right? On how to collect data, how to understand data, how to analyze data for senior students, in hopes that these senior students will graduate, and after they graduate, they will be working either in the Addis Ababa Transport Authority, or they will have the capacity to use this data in other places they will be working in. Now, what happened next? The data collection and processing, the review of data by the Transport Authority, the incorporation of the feedback, and then the discussion with the Federal Transport to digitize the national intercity bus network. Still here. And at the end of the day, there was a presentation. At the end of the project, there was a presentation to the Ministry of Transport and the finalization of the project. Let's take a look at how this actually went on. Next slide, please. Now, let's take a look at the challenges, because there were many. The challenges that we faced with WRI, World Resource Institute, who were implementing this, who were managing this project. There was a problem. The government said, okay, we'll provide you with baseline data. There was a problem with this baseline data. Some of it was inaccurate. There was overlap because we got multiple Excel sheets from many departments. There was many overlap between them. We wanted to have, you remember, this unified index of tools. So we had to do some cleaning. Unreliability of transport services. We actually were surprised to see that it was easier to map the paratransit rather than the formal bus service. The formal bus services were harder to catch. They were more irregular than the paratransit in this case. Yeah, some other challenges. Challenges that the data collectors, the food researchers faced. Again, the unreliability of transport services. Some routes were inactive. So they got an input to begin with. We didn't do identification surveys. We got the index from the identification from the government lists. So some of the routes we found they were inactive. So the lists might have been a little bit out of date. It was difficult to locate buses at stations. Some buses didn't come. We found out that actually we can map only 1 to 2 routes a day, but we have to post a minimum of 3. So this means our project plan was overly optimistic. Weather affected the GPS. There was a lot of rain at the time. Our data collection app at the time overlapped the rainy season, so it was very challenging. The taxis, which are the 14-seater buses, they deviate from the route. They take the shortest route. So sometimes we see that they are going through this corridor, sometimes through a completely different corridor, but they end up at the same destination. And the technology, the app was not reliable. It didn't work on all of the smartphones. One big issue with this project is that we used the smartphones of the students. You need to have your own hardware. Because if there is one error on your smartphone, you know how to fix it on other devices. So you have a uniform list of hardware devices. Next slide, please. Okay, so after overcoming these challenges, now we have the final result, which is what we were hoping to achieve. You can see that for the very first time, we have an accessibility measure for the city of Addis Ababa. This is a very big deal because this goes beyond transportation. This goes to infrastructure planning. This goes for tourism, for job accessibility, and so on. Also, there were like digital and printed maps. So on the right hand side, we can see these are like passenger information system. So the passengers are able to see, yeah, I can take this route and this station, I can interchange with these other routes if I want to go to my destination. Of course, this is written in Amharic to be more like user friendly to the people that are living in Addis. Next slide, please. Lastly, this is the Minister of Communications of Ethiopia. And this image is from the official release of Addis Ababa, or Ethiopia's first trip planning app. So, using this GTFS data output that we came up with the work of the hard work of the students at the universities, they managed a startup, a small startup company, came in and said, okay, we have this app that can consume the GTFS data for trip planning. We want to fit it, we want to design it in a way that is fitted specifically for the Addis Ababa transport industry. So this was the first digital trip planning app in Ethiopia, and it was based on this data collection exercise. So now you not only have this app to present the data to the users in a user-friendly way, but also you have the data coming from the app because the app gets the user location, it gets their travel channels, all of this. So you have incoming data from transport users as well through digital tools such as this. Now, I believe, yeah, so this concludes our data lifecycle. We talked about how to plan first for your data collection project. We talked about how to collect, what software tools enable you to collect your data, which software tools enable you to collect, to process and manage your data. And we talked about some analysis use cases of this data. Now, we wish to go into an exercise. The exercise is supposed to be the accumulation of what we've seen here in this session, and specifically on the planning. So in groups, based on our numbers, I think we divided into 6. We want to plan a paratransit mapping exercise from start to finish, and we want to follow these steps. We want the first step, to list, okay, what are the surveys that we want to do? We want to have a list of the surveys. Second, we want to, okay, what are the activities that we're going to do in the project? So field research and the surveys are just one activity, which is the field research. What are the other activities that we want to do from sequence, like the first step, the second step, and so on? And lastly, we want an estimated timeline for the whole project. This is just, it's okay to make mistakes. This is for discussion, for facilitated discussion. Second, we want to budget for the software and hardware expenses, as well as the team members. So try to estimate, okay, we have 2 surveys, for example, that we want to do. It will require X amount of working days from the field researchers, and maybe we need some working days for the project manager, for you define the team members and how many working days for each, and how many smartphones and laptops that you need, and if you're going to buy any license for any software, or if you're going completely open source, you're going to be not paying any money for the software. Lastly, to mention the expected challenges that you might face in the field. For this, we want to use digital tools, so Microsoft Word or Excel. This is important because we want this output, we want to take this output, and we will be reviewing it if time allows in this session. If not, we will be reviewing it and emailing a reviewed version to you after the workshop. Okay, what have we talked about today? First, conclusion. we gained understanding of why data is needed and what do we mean by the word data. So we try to take it from its abstract description to a more detailed technical description in the context of paratransit map. Next, we dive into the main two main structures: the data lifecycle and the components of a transport information system, which follows the structure of a standard information system, but it's contextualized for transport. Third, we went into the different data types. So we described what data means, and we went into the technical explanation of what are the data types that we have: GIS, GTLS, the geography data, time and data, transportation data, and so on. Talked about also data that had to do with the passengers, right? So the user preference and so on. We listed all the unique challenges of paratransit and mapping paratransit and trying to fit this very dynamic kind of service into a structured database. We also viewed the data collection or the field research. We use these two terms interchangeably. We viewed them as a project. So we looked at them from a project management perspective, and we looked briefly on how we can manage and plan for this kind of project. We related the different digital tools, the different software tools, to each stage of the data lifecycle. So we followed the data lifecycle one by one, and we related each cycle to different software tools, most of them open, not all of them open, to enable us to do the map. And lastly, we went over some actual use cases of the data in Cairo and in Addis. I see we have a participant also in the chat from Kampala. We've actually used the same approach to map public transport in Kampala and the Boda Bodas, the motorcycle taxis, which are very prevalent in the capital, in Kampala, and very hard to manually quantify. We use open source tools and custom built tools to map those Boda Bodas and the different paratransit services as well. So we've seen the actual use cases. So the takeaway from this session is what? Digital tools enable you to do data collection with your local capacity, with minimal resources, and you can make the processes that were very expensive in the near past, you can make it today much more efficiently, much cheaper, if you just gain the proper understanding and you follow the proper steps to plan and manage your data collection projects. So you can have this local capacity, you can keep your data up to date, and you can have, eventually, you can have data-driven decisions in your city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And sorry for all the impasses we had during this session, and especially the last part, which you didn't manage to lead the exercise. But I can say it was very productive, and in our session we had some insights also. Thank you very much to everyone there for participating, and see you next time in our next training session.